Hi fam, it's Dylan's mum Deborah. This is Dyl Friends.
He gives you a back rub and says, you know, you're going well, Brian. Oh, it's special.
Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Just keep showing up and find a way.
Cam was so nervous he couldn't swallow water.
Handed him a sheet of paper with 6 names and said, Chief, we've got to cut these 6 blokes.
Wow, shut up. I've just been barbed by a stingray, mate.
I'm just yelling at him, you saved my life, you saved my life, you saved my life. Thank you, thank you.
I spent the last, I think it was a couple of weeks in jail. The deepest, darkest moments often bring about our biggest highs.
Dr. Russ, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
We just worked out that we're like neighbours.
Yeah,
we should hang out.
Go for a beer.
Yeah. Have you been? Can I pick up a little accent?
Yeah, so I left England about 30 years ago to come here for a working holiday, and then just fell in love with the place.
Melbourne?
Yeah, Melbourne. So, but when I go back, I'm from Liverpool originally. And they go, "Where are you from? You're not from here. Where are you from?"
Have you got the Australian twang now that they pick up?
They reckon I sound Aussie over there.
Well, I've got a cousin who is living abroad. She's been in England for 4 years, and she comes back with like a little twang now as well. So it just shows how much you can like pick it up along the way. Are you an EPL man?
No.
No, okay. Either am I, so that's good. Fantastic. I was just going to pretend I was for a little bit. I knew a little. I go for Arsenal. I don't know any players that play there. Mate, absolute honour to get you on the pod today. I'm so excited for this, genuinely, and making your time. I know how busy you are. But our short relationship, which I hope's a long one from today's come through a mutual friend of ours, Jonah Oliver.
Yeah, great guy. Fantastic sports psychologist and knows his stuff.
Yeah, it was so cool when I got an email from him linking in with you. Like, how did that come about? Because I'm such a huge fan of his. I think one of his episodes last year, I talk about it a lot, how much it was really special and helped me a lot.
Yeah, well, so a lot of what I do these days is travel around Australia training psychologists and doctors and other health professionals in how to manage depression, anxiety, stress and so forth without using drugs. And so it must be about 20 years ago, Jonah came along to one of those workshops, and he was very interested in kind of taking this approach and applying it in the sports world, which he's done with fantastic results.
Yeah, he sure has. Do you still consult with patients or more just other psychologists now?
Yeah, a handful, but mostly what I'm doing now is writing books and training health professionals.
Yeah, it's incredible. Sold over 1 million copies of The Happiness Trap, which we'll get into later. This is genuinely exciting. I've got a book out too, which has sold about 3 copies. So to sort of stand with someone that's had a second edition and over 50% new material, must be pretty special to be holding that.
Yeah, look, it is special. It got rejected by every publisher in Australia initially, and this tiny little New Zealand publishing house went with it, and they call it their sort of Harry Potter, But it was just at the point of giving up, and they came out of the blue and said, "Oh, we like this." So.
That's so cool. So when you wrote it, you were shopping it around to sort of get it to people. Obviously, you always backed it in that you knew that there was some great information in there, which proves having 1 million copies sold. But how long did it take for it to sort of take off?
Well, so, I read the book in 2005. It didn't get published until 2007. So this approach, it's called acceptance and commitment therapy, or in the world of sports and performance, it's called acceptance and commitment training. It's become very, very popular now. But 20 years ago, no one had heard of it, and so people were like, "What is this?" And it was quite countercultural at the time. It took a long slog. It took 2 years to get it published, and then I don't know, another 3 or 4 years of hard yakka before it finally started to take off and be successful. It wasn't an overnight thing.
What was the biggest turning point for it? Like, did something sort of catapult it, or was it just gradual over time?
I think it was really gradual over time because I started just running a lot of training around it. And so all the people that came to my training, most of them were doctors, psychologists and so forth. And so they were like, read this book. This will really help the work that we're doing. So they kind of became salespeople for the book. And I think that's how it took off. Yeah.
Awesome. To learn more about acceptance, commitment therapy, I suppose I'd love to go back to a little bit at the start to realise how you got involved with it.
Yeah.
What was because you were a doctor originally?
Yeah, I was a GP.
A GP.
I I trained in the UK. I came to Australia and was working here and fell in love with it. I was a GP in Melbourne, and I was depressed and I was anxious and I was miserable, and I couldn't understand it. I got the doctor, I got the status, living in one of the best countries on the planet, and yet I was absolutely miserable. My main method of pushing away my anxiety and my misery was eating Tim Tams. So
shouldn't laugh at that, but that's some serious.
So I was huge. I mean, I was like 15, 20 kilograms heavier than I am today, and I was like in my mid-20s, and I had high blood pressure. So it was. I was like, why am I so miserable? And I started exploring different ways of dealing with depression and anxiety, and found a lot of really good stuff. But when it all came together was when I first discovered this model that had come out of America called so in therapy it's called acceptance and commitment therapy. In the world of sports it's usually called psychological flexibility training. So there's different names for it, but it was an approach that just immediately resonated with me. I thought, wow, this is amazing. It sort of transformed my life, and then I thought I've got to get this stuff out there. So I started working one-on-one with I'd already made a shift from being a GP to being a therapist by then. And it was just getting great results with my clients in therapy. And I thought, well, how do I get this out to more people? Oh, let's write a book.
What did you try before this? Like, did you know, like being a doctor, I'm not a doctor myself, but I can imagine that'd be quite scary in a sense of going, well, I'm a doctor, I'm a health professional, but I've also got some depression and anxiety issues. Was that...
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock, and certainly in medical training, I don't know if it's changed now, but back then it was all really it was all about medication and taking antidepressants and anti-anxiety tablets and so forth, which was a path I didn't really want to go down. So it was as I started reading books on psychology, I started to get very interested in psychological health, which eventually led to a change in profession. With a big drop in income, because you make a lot more money as a doctor than you do as a therapist. So I didn't want to go down the path of medication. So I started reading various books on psychology and attending various sort of workshops in different models of therapy. So probably the best known model out there, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. There's some good stuff in there. I looked at sort of mindfulness meditation. I looked at all the sort of positive thinking and NLP and all of this kind of stuff, but none of it really kind of gave me exactly what I wanted. And so when I discovered ACT, it was really love at first sight. It was wow, hallelujah.
Were you training yourself, or were you seeking it from someone else? Like, were you?
So I was going to workshops with other people that were running these courses. The first time I actually came across ACT, I'd been trying to create something like it myself, but really struggling. And a mate said to me, go and check out this textbook. And so I went to the bookstore and bought the textbook on ACT, and I stayed up all night reading it until like 5 a.m. in the morning. I couldn't put it down. It was really like the clouds parted. There were, angels singing the Hallelujah chorus. It was like, this is amazing. And then shortly thereafter, I flew over to the States to train with the guy who created this, Stephen Hayes, is a professor of psychology at the University of Reno, Nevada.
Wow. Do you know what's crazy is, like, I've had two feelings like this in my life, like that you're explaining, and I feel like they could be similar. Is, I've dealt with I've only really realised that my whole life I used to just think I was a super nervous person. Like, I was always like, feeling really nervous, not realising that it was like probably something a little bit deeper. Yeah. And I only sort of realised it was like going into like prenatal, I had a baby and things were starting to sort of heat up a little bit in my life. And for so long, I just like put off conversations that I never wanted to have, and exactly what I don't know if we were having the conversation off air before or on air. It was like just avoiding absolutely any fucking feeling that I could ever feel of any stress whatsoever. Yeah. And there was two things that like have really given me a sign of that hope that you look for when you read something that you think that I'm not alone. Yeah. And one was the feeling that you were talking. I was reading a chapter, and I'm not a big reader, but I read a chapter of this book called Dare. Have you ever, Barry McDonough, have you ever heard the book Dare? No. But I think it's a similar process to your story as well, in the sense of it was the first time I'd read something going like, oh my God, I'm not the the only person that has ever felt like this or had these thoughts or thought about it in this sense.
Yeah. Well, like, everyone has this going on, you know. It's sort of the human mind's evolved in such a way that it just naturally creates psychological suffering for everyone. You know, you've got a mind that has evolved to predict and anticipate danger. Like, if there was a caveman or cavewoman that wasn't really good at anticipating threats and danger, they didn't live very long. So now, after, you know, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, our mind's doing this all the time. You know, what might go wrong? I might fail. I might screw up. I might get rejected. This might not work. That might go. You know, like, have you ever been awake at 3 o'clock in the morning with your mind doing this? Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I think so. Maybe once or twice.
And I'm sure most of the listeners have too, right?
Yeah.
You know, the same thing also. Our minds have evolved to reflect on painful stuff from the past. Like, as a caveman, if you survived an encounter with a woolly mammoth, it's useful to reflect on that. How did I escape? What did I do to get away? Then you can use that knowledge next time. But in the modern world, we do this all the time. Why did I say that stupid thing? Why did I get drunk? Why did I make that mistake? Oh, I'm such an idiot, you know. And so we just spend a lot of time dwelling on the past and worrying about the future. And then the third thing is, as a cave person, you've got to be really good at spotting problems. If you don't spot problems, you're dead. And so in the modern world, we're just spotting problems everywhere, when we're often spotting problems that aren't really problems. So this is a normal human mind. It sees problems everywhere, conjures up fears about the future, dwells on pain from the past. And on top of all of that, our minds are just incredible at judging. Because if you think about it, as a cave person, you've got to fit in with the group, right? Like, if the tribe, the group you belong to, kick you out, what happens? You're dead, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to live very long. The wolves will eat you for lunch, or if you survive lunch, the bears will get you for dinner. You're not going to make it till the next day. So how does your mind ensure you fit in with the group? It compares you to every other member. Am I fitting in? Am I doing enough? Am I doing the right thing? Am I measuring up? Am I doing anything that might get me thrown out? Does this sound a bit like your mind?
Well, it just affirms that I could have been the best caveman ever. I think I could have lived for a long time if I was a caveman. But those sort of values have probably... they're not relevant in the modern world now.
Yeah, well,
as much.
The problem is, in the modern world, it's not just a small group. Now you can compare yourself to people on Facebook and Instagram and TV shows. I mean, you know, a teenage girl can compare her body to an airbrushed supermodel. And so as a result of this constant comparison to other members of the group, virtually everyone starts to get this sense of, I'm not good enough, from a very young age. Because you think about it, even as a toddler, all the people in your family are bigger, faster, stronger than you. So for almost everyone, with rare exceptions, the kind of first I'm not good enough stories start showing up when you're still in childhood.
It's interesting, isn't it? Well, again, as soon as you sort of came in, I was already chewing your ear off, but we're talking about the sense that two parts. One, I was like, I'm so sick of this fucking word anxiety. Like, it's just such a word that, it plays such a role. I feel like it comes up all the time, whether it's talking about it, thinking about it, doing podcasts about it. And it's almost like I'm annoyed at the word, because even now it's like people can overuse that word going, I'm feeling anxiety. It's like, no, you're just anxious at the moment, or you're just nervous at the moment, versus this is what actual anxiety is. Yeah.
I mean, you know, anxiety is a normal human emotion that everybody feels in a challenging situation with an uncertain outcome. But as you say, there's different words for it. You can talk about fight or flight response. You can talk about an adrenaline rush. You can talk about being nervous or wired up. If you kind of think of and this may be more relevant to you, you know, the kind of the rock star or the actor that gets stage fright and won't go on. Or the rock star and actor that says, this is an adrenaline rush, I'm pumped, I'm revved. It's the same internal experience, what technically is called anxiety, but the one's going, I don't like this is bad, this is awful, I can't go out on stage until this anxiety is gone, whereas the other is, I'm going to use this and channel it into my performance.
So this is exactly the point before, and you've said it way better than I ever could, but the point of this earlier thing that I read from that book that I was talking about was that the fear of excitement and anxiety are both the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And it's actually how you perceive it that is actually how you get the feeling from it. So this method that I tried was almost like, when I'm feeling like this, it's almost like pretending that you're really enjoying it and you welcome it and you're like, this is the best. I love this. You know, give me the biggest fucking anxiety attack you've ever given your life. And all of a sudden it started going down because I don't know what it was. I was like tricking myself into thinking that I was having fun.
Yeah, well, that's that's a big part of what we do in acceptance and commitment training or therapy, because that's the acceptance part. It's like, come on in, anxiety. I've got room for you, you know.
I love you, man. You rock. I love this.
And it's because like we were talking before we started recording about anxiety disorders.
Yes.
So what turns a normal human emotion of anxiety into an anxiety disorder is avoidance. If you're like, anxiety is bad, I can't have it, I've got to make it go away, I can't do the things that I want in life, until anxiety goes and you start shrinking your life, avoiding the stuff that triggers these feelings, what actually happens is that the more you try to push it, suppress it, avoid it, the bigger it gets. It's like it's almost like you can develop a sort of struggle switch at the back of your mind. Anxiety shows up, struggle switch goes on. I don't like this. I want it gone. Please get rid of this. Ooh, now I've got anxiety about my anxiety. Oh no, it's getting bigger. More anxiety. Oh no, bigger still. This is how you get panic attacks and so forth. You know, it's this struggle with anxiety that just amplifies it. So when you said you kind of welcome it in and make friends with it, and surprisingly it drops, that's what 1,000 published studies show. When you stop the struggles with anxiety, it actually reduces.
You're reading my mind. I've never really spoken about this before, but I'm more than happy to. That it was really crazy because I went through this really strange time last year where I was anxious, kept avoiding it, avoided it even more. The more I avoided it, the more it came. And it almost got so big that like it nearly turned into like a form of OCD. Like I just like kept thinking about, I couldn't not think about it.
Yeah.
And it nearly floored me. Like I couldn't like even leave the house for like a couple of days.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where like I'd actually had a panic attack. Like I couldn't move.
Yeah.
And without that like happening and going through that whole experience, it was terrible. And now I just have anxiety about that thing that will happen again. But I've learnt that that's actually just a pathway, that it's how it works without sort of accepting it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So kind of switching off that. So this is one of the things that we kind of teach people how to do.
Yeah. So back to the book, before we not outlaw life's problems and no one ever has to experience anything ever again but smiles and laughter. The Happiness Trap, Stop Struggling, Start Living. Why is that the name of the book?
Well, it's called The Happiness Trap because popular ideas about happiness are misleading and inaccurate and will actually make you miserable if you hold on to them and base your life on them. And probably the most common of these is the idea that happiness means feeling good. It means an absence of uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And so the best way for me to be happy is to try to avoid or get rid of all the difficult thoughts and feelings. And if you're holding on to that idea or that attitude, it's actually going to, we're just talking about what happens with anxiety. Can I give a jargon term here?
Please do.
So the jargon term is experiential avoidance. And this means the ongoing attempt to try to avoid and get rid of unwanted, unpleasant thoughts and feelings. And what the research shows is the higher your level of experiential avoidance, the more desperate you are to avoid and get rid of difficult thoughts and feelings, the greater your risk of depression, anxiety disorders, addiction. The list just goes on and on and on.
Wow.
So
just to break that down, even just from my own brain. So you're saying, like, just say, for example, the more we don't want to think about certain things in the past or certain things that are happening right now, or avoiding any sort of hard conversations, the more that's actually just going to build up and face other things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's lots of good research on this. You kind of, if I tell you, don't think about a white bear, you're immediately going to think about a white bear. And so if you start trying to push away thoughts, worrying thoughts, depressing thoughts, the research shows that they do go away in the short term, but there's a rebound effect that come back with greater and greater frequency and intensity.
What did if you happen to talk about your own situation in this, I'm not, you don't have to go into specifics, but like, how was that sort of presenting for you?
Well, it's like I was doing these kind of positive thinking strategies and challenging my negative thoughts and trying to replace them with positive ones, and practicing relaxation techniques, and all of those things they do work a little bit, but this stuff just kept coming back and back, and it's sort of I guess I just wasn't really satisfied. I just want to, and so the idea of actually just accepting this stuff was so weird. I hate this stuff. I hate these thoughts and feelings. What? But let's give it a go. And the problem is the word acceptance is often misunderstood. Like, people often think accepting means liking it, wanting it, tolerating it, sucking it up, giving in. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means kind of really opening up, making room, and just allowing this stuff to flow through you. Let it come and go in its own good time. Sometimes these thoughts and feelings hang around for a long time. Sometimes they move through very quickly. But if you just open up and make room for it, then you don't amplify it. You don't switch on that struggle switch and make it bigger and messier and stickier. And so it's paradoxical stuff. It's the opposite of what we think should work. But I mean, it's like you drive, right?
Yep.
And you know that when your car is skidding, what does your instinct tell you to do?
Go the other way.
Well,
I'll brake.
That's what, yeah, both really,
Yeah.
isn't it? That's what your instinct is. Slam on the brakes, go the other way, both of which makes the skid worse.
Yeah.
Whereas to get out of the skid, what you need to do is gently work the brake and turn into it. But you only know that because you learn to drive, and it's the same also. You've seen those old cowboy films where the guy falls into the quicksand and right, what do you need to do in quicksand?
We're meant to go slow, aren't you?
You're supposed to stretch out,
Yeah.
then you can float. But if you struggle, it sucks you down. So
I've got another one for you on that.
Yeah, go.
Bondi Beach, okay? Don't swim into the rip.
Yeah.
You got to go back out.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I learned the hard way as well. Yeah.
So all of these things, so it's the same with our own thoughts and feelings. This doesn't come naturally. Our instinct is to struggle with the stuff, avoid it, suppress it. But all of that just has this rebound effect that makes it bigger and bigger.
Is there sort of like a way you could sort of break that? I know each person situation listening to this, they've probably all got one thing or two things in their mind going, oh, it's like that thing that I try and avoid, or this I try and avoid. Is there a generic sort of case study you can give us to practice that, or do you have to sort of talk to a specific thing?
No, we can do that. So I mean, it's probably easier in this setting to deal with thoughts rather than feelings. Feelings is a bit harder. But here's a little exercise. So I'll get your listeners to do it, and you can do it, and Darcy can do it too, and we'll kind of see how it goes. So just bring to mind a sort of negative thought that I often use the word hooks. Kind of thoughts and feelings hook us, and they pull our attention away from what we're doing, or they jerk us into self-defeating patterns of behavior, or they just jerk us around. So I'll ask your listeners to kind of pick a thought that hooks you. Let's start with a not good enough story, or a worry about something. I mean, it's whenever I have a new client, one of my routine questions is like, if I could listen into your mind when it's beating you up, what are the meanest, nastiest things I'd hear it saying? And if you could listen into my mind, you hear it say, well, it's not like this all the time, but when it gets stuck into me, it's, I'm fat and old, I'm stupid, I'm lazy, I'm workaholic, I'm boring, I don't fit in, I'm different to everyone else, I'm weird, I'm a bad dad. And, if I could listen into your mind, Dyl, when it's really, really giving you a hard time, what are the nastiest things I'd hear it saying?
You're a fraud.
Oh, yeah, I get that one.
I'm a fraud, yeah, massive fraud. Pretender. Bad dad, you work too much, focus on the wrong things, selfish.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, there's
and that.
plenty of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage, and I'm sure everyone listening to this has got multiple versions of not good enough. So let's work with that one. What I'm going to ask you to do, I'll ask you and the listeners is to just for about 10 seconds buy into that thought. Get that thought in your head, I'm a bad dad, or I'm a fraud, or I'm a loser. And for 10 seconds, I want you to buy into it, believe it as much as you possibly can. It's going to be unpleasant, but then I'm going to take you through a way to unhook from it so that it loses some of its impact. So let's just do this now. I've got one. Buy into it, believe it. Don't push it away. Don't challenge it. Don't try to replace it with a positive thought. Buy into it, believe it. Let it hook you. And if you're really getting hooked, you should feel uncomfortable. It's usually unpleasant when we're hooked. Now, the next step is to replay that thought with these words in front. I'm having the thought that. I'm having the thought that I'm a bad dad. I'm having the thought that I'm an imposter. The next step is to replay it with a slightly longer phrase. I notice I'm having the thought that. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm a loser. So what happened as you did that?
I suppose it was just noticing that it's a thought and it's not actually true. It's not actually.
It's a thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's kind of, that's usually the first skill that I teach people. Is like, there's a huge difference between I'm a loser and, I'm having the thought that I'm a loser, And we can go further with that. We can call it the loser story. Oh, there's the loser story. We can go even further and thanks, mine. There's the loser story. I've heard this one before, and, have a bit of a playfulness about it. Because our mind only does this because it's misguided attempt to try and help us. It's kind of, why does your mind beat you up? It's like one of those school teachers from 100 years ago. Let's just beat this boy into shape, give him a whipping, and then he'll sort himself out. That's what your mind's trying to do, right? And sometimes it works. If you beat yourself up enough, it does kind of beat you into shape. But most of the time, it just ends up paralyzing you and making you depressed and so forth. So
for sure.
So yeah, I invite people to just play around with that. Just when you're getting hooked, just notice what the thought is that's hooking you and just reply, I'm having the thought that. And if you're still hooked, go a bit further. I notice I'm having the thought that.
I think from that, is the most important part nearly because, let me try and speak here. What I'm trying to say is it's so good to have that technique, right? But the most important part is using it consistently.
Yeah.
So it's like that trigger of going, all right, the more you use that, the more it'll come up. And then eventually the goal would be that every time that thought comes up, the more you just come back with that.
Yeah. I mean, you're never going to get perfect at this stuff, but it's just being realistic. There's like if you've got a story, a not good enough story that's been showing up since childhood, I'm a loser or whatever, for 30, 40, 50 years, you're not going to be able to get rid of that. But what you can do is lay down a new neural pathway that goes, there's the loser story again. Oh, there's the not good enough story. I know this one. Oh, here's my mind beating me up to try and knock me into shape. It's okay, mind. I've got it handled. That's what you can learn to do, But it's for sure it takes practice. It's a skill. It's like any skill.
In terms of acceptance therapy, what would be one of the most common things? Is that what it is? Mainly the narrative that we tell ourselves that people are trying to, is that how it's best effective?
Well, there's kind of three strands to it. So one strand of it is learning how to open up and make room for difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories. Just learn how to let them flow through you.
Yeah.
That's the sort of acceptance part. The second strand of it, which is equally important, is getting in touch with your values, your heart's deepest desires for how you want to behave, how you want to treat yourself and others, what you want to put into the world, and using those values as a sort of compass to guide your actions and guide what you do in life. And then the third part of it is really focusing your attention, learning how to focus your attention on what you're doing and engage in what you're doing rather than kind of getting distracted. We were talking before the recording started out, we've all got ADHD these days. It's really hard to focus attention and engage in what you're doing. So all of these three things come together. If you asked me to define happiness, I wouldn't define it as feeling good or feeling pleasure or feeling contentment. I'd define it as living a rich, full and meaningful life in which we feel the full range of human emotions, both the pleasant ones and the painful ones. And in order to build that sort of life, we kind of live our values, we do the stuff that's important and meaningful, we open up and make room for the full range of human emotions. You'll have love and joy, you'll also have fear and sadness, and we focus on and engage in what we're doing to get the most out of it. So those three things come together, and it really... I mean, they've used this across the whole spectrum of mental health issues. This works with depression and addiction and eating disorders and anxiety disorders. And, obviously, Jonah was talking about the world of sports performance, business performance. It really seems to apply to every human being, no matter what, because you're always struggling with something.
That was one of the main parts that I remember from Jonah's chat was, we just had an hour and a half chat, and I thought that I'd learnt everything that he was talking about. And we'd spoken about, nerves. It's the price of admission.
Yeah.
One thing that I repeat on a daily basis that he sort of talks about.
Yeah.
And we're talking about that, how athletes get nervous or they get anxious, right? And we're talking about today, you have to go into that.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how Cam Smith was putting on the 17th green. He was going down. I was like, he just looks so calm. How is he so calm? And he's like, have you not listened to anything I was saying? He was... so nervous. He was so nervous. He was so anxious. He nearly choked on his water. But the reason he's so good is he accepts it and goes into it and he feels it and then he performs.
Well, it's like, I'm nervous sitting here with you. It's I do public speaking on a regular basis, sometimes live audiences of thousands of people. I've done live TV, live radio, I'm anxious being here. Can you see my hands? They're kind of a bit kind of shiny. Have a little feel of them. They're a bit sweaty there. They're kind of a little bit shaky.
I was just about to say, don't be nervous, I'm a loser. But then I was like, no, I'm having thoughts that I'm a loser. No, I'm not.
But, I'm allowing it to be there. Yeah. It's not stopping me. Again, it's like, okay, well, this is what comes. It's a challenging situation. I don't know exactly how it's going to go. But it's like, this is what comes with challenging situations. And if I was like, oh no, I don't want to do that because my hands are sweaty and my heart's racing, then I wouldn't be here and I'd miss out on this great opportunity to
that's awesome. No, mate, please, I'm honoured to have you in. Don't be silly.
I'm so pleased that you guys are talking about this and getting these messages out there, because it's so common, especially with men. But there's something wrong with me if I've got these feelings. There's something wrong with me if I've got these thoughts, and just suck it up and swallow a concrete pill. And a real man doesn't have these feelings. A real man never gets depressed or anxious. These are the kind of bullshit messages that are out there.
Yeah, well, far out. I wouldn't be a real man if any of those were true. But we really appreciate it. I think for us, like, I like to speak, hopefully a lot of people will resonate with this, but like at 16, 17 years old, I just thought everyone knew what they were doing, right? And then like as you get older, you just realize no one fucking has any idea what they're doing. We're all like as cooked as each other. Yeah. And the more we can just talk about this stuff, the better you can feel. And I suppose if anyone's listening to this feeling any form of like hope or excitement at trialing something new, like that feeling that you experienced when you were first looking at ACT, or what I've had a chat with you today about, it just gives you that such a cool thing of, fuck, I'm not alone here. Like this is so normal to experience these things.
Absolutely, it is normal. It's so normal. The statistics are just ridiculous. If you actually, so DSM is this big book, stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders.
I was going to read that, but I just picked up this one first instead of The Happiness Trap. I was going to read that next.
It's a big, thick book that you might find on a psychologist's bookcase, and it categorizes all the different types of mental health issues that people have. And so everything from all the things we've been mentioning, depression, anxiety, addiction, and so forth. What the research shows is between 30 to 50% of the population will experience a disorder that's listed within this book at some point in their life. About 1 in 4 people is going to experience an addiction. About 1 in 10 people in any year is suffering from depression. About 1 in 3 people will have not anxiety, but an anxiety disorder at some point in their life. And then if you think about all the stuff that's not considered disorders, like marriage breakups or dealing with the troubles of teenage kids that I'm going through at the moment, or, just unemployment or poverty or all the big stresses that are out there, then you really come to see that the kind of psychological suffering is normal. It's the normal human condition. This idea that's out there of these kind of happy, positive people that are living in this state of bliss all the time, it's just so unrealistic.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that as soon as you realise that, and hopefully you're never going to get things to 100%, and you're obviously a doctor and psychologist and everything you are, and you'll still experience these things. Like, that's an incredible message for people, I think. Like, as much as we can get to where we want to be, life just throws things at us that we have to be capable to handle. And that point that you touched on before about why we talk about this, one of my favourite sort of analogies that have come on the show, especially for young men, a really special guy, Tom Harkin, he does a program called Tomorrow Man.
Right.
And this really changed my whole perspective on this sort of stuff. It was, talks about range and like men in general. There's stoicism, there's all these incredible things, toughness, we can go out and we can kill a cow or whatever they used to do back in the day, or you can be tough and you can do what you want to do, but you can also have range and you can be vulnerable, you can ask for help, you can be emotional, you can be anxious, you can be those things, and it doesn't take away from either or. So that's probably like our biggest message or biggest thing that we're trying to all do is have range, be both. Doesn't mean you can't be one or the other.
Such an important message. So true.
Love to talk about the acceptance part of ACT of ACT, because that's like a really big thing for me that was probably the hardest for intrusive thoughts or uncomfortable thoughts.
Yeah.
And it's so repetitive. So the first thing we spoke about was the incredible workshop we just did about replacing it as a thought and not as a truth.
Yeah.
Is there any more other sort of strategies of that? Because there's the uncomfortable experience in the body as well.
Yeah, well, all of this is kind of revolves around living your values at the core. Your values are sort of your heart's deepest desires for the sort of person you want to be, how you want to treat yourself and others and the world around you. And as you live your values, everyone's values are a little bit different, but probably most people would relate to values around being loving and kind and caring and courageous and honest and open. And a simple way to kind of get in touch with your values is to think, what would you want to be remembered for at your funeral? What would you want people to say about the sort of person you were? If they asked you, your closest friends or your closest family, what were your greatest qualities as a human being? Not what you'd achieved, not how much money or status or, all the things you'd achieved, but your qualities as a human being. What were you like to be with? What would you want them to say? I'll ask you.
Generous.
Mm-hmm.
I'd want them to say, one word is that my...
No, 2 or 3.
Yeah,
4.
well, I just want them to say that I want to sort of be the person that people come to when they've got problems. And I think not even problems, just things going on, because I've reflected on this a lot, but early in my life, all I wanted to be was liked.
Yeah.
And then, like every young guy, and then you realise when the shit hits the fan or when people are going through certain things that they go through in life, they don't go to the people that they like, they go to the people that they respect.
Yeah.
And that's the same as me, I'm not going to Jono that I have 6 beers with on the weekend when I'm having an anxiety attack. I go to my wife or my dad or mum that I have those relationships with. So for me, in one word answer, it's being that person.
Yeah. So kind of generous, kind.
Yeah. Trustworthy.
Trustworthy, supportive. Loyal. Yeah. Open. Yeah. So, that would be an example of
fun.
Of some fun. Of some key, values, right? And the more you sort of put those into the world and be the sort of person you want to be, the more fulfilling life gets, right? So the whole idea of making room for uncomfortable feelings and unhooking from difficult thoughts is to make it easier for you to live your values and do the stuff that's important. So in the ACT approach, we'd never ask anybody to accept feelings of anxiety unless it was going to help them live their values and do the important stuff. I make room for my anxiety today so that I could come here and do this interview with you, because this is important. This matters. This is in line with one of my core values of helping. It's kind of getting a really important message out there to people. And so, sometimes we get hooked by thoughts that are true, but we can still unhook from them. This guy came to see me a few years back, and he was diagnosed with major depression, and he was a huge guy, massively overweight guy. And he had a really harsh inner critic, I'm fat, I'm disgusting, I'm killing myself, I've given you the polite edited version. His was a lot ruder than that. And so I kind of was taking him through that technique that we've just done. And he goes, but it's true, I really am fat. And he pulled up his shirt, and I was like, well, thanks for sharing. And then I kind of said, look, in this approach, we don't get into debating whether your thoughts are true or false. That's not what it's about. The question is, are they helpful? Are they helping you to live your values and do the things that you want to do? So another one of my favorite ways of getting to values is magic wand question. I'll wave a magic wand, I said to him. All these depressing thoughts and feelings are like water off a duck's back. They no longer jerk you around in any way. If that happened, how would you treat your body? He said, well, wouldn't eat so much shit, mate. And I said, okay, so what would you eat? Well, less shit, mate. Okay, so you might eat some better food. Yeah. What else? Well, wouldn't sit around all day just watching shit on the telly. Okay, so you might exercise more. Yeah. Okay, so when your mind starts kind of speaking to you this way, I'm fat, I'm disgusting, I'm a loser, does that help you to do those things? Does that help you to, I'm going to call this value self-care. And if you were in touch with this value of self-care, you'd be making different choices. You'd be eating more, exercising more. When your mind says, I'm fat, I'm a loser, whatever, does that help you to kind of live those values and do those things? Well, nah. What happens? Well, I'll just get depressed. Yeah, and then what happens? Well, I'll eat shit. It's okay. So we are never going to waste time in this room debating whether these thoughts are true or false. That's not what's important. The question is, are they helpful? If these thoughts are helping you do the stuff you want to do, great. But if they're not, let's unhook from them and let's focus on what matters. So thoughts may or may not be true with this approach. The question is whether they're helpful.
It's really interesting. Yeah, it's super, because the part that, and one thing I've sort of learned from this is when you do have those thoughts, the number one thing that I used to do is that reassurance matter of like, you'd ask people if they say, you don't think this, do you? And I'd look to people for reassurance of the problem, which is not it's not going to help long term in that stuff. So by taking out the fact that if it's true or not, it's just not going to help to get to where you want to be. Sort of it eliminates that as well.
It does. Yeah.
I like that.
So all of this is kind of then in the service of your values, but even that's not enough. It's because if you're just living your values, but you're doing it on automatic pilot, you're not focusing. You want to be the person that people come to. But if you're not present, if you're not like, your listeners can't tell, but like you're really engaged and focused right now, but if you were just staring off into space or glazed eyes, it would be a very different experience. So it's also about focusing your attention, and I guess on what you're doing. If you're doing something pleasurable and enjoyable, you're going to get much more out of it when you're really focused in it than if you're doing it on autopilot.
I've heard this before, and I really hope this is correct, but with anxiety, depression, or any mental illness side of things, I've heard this saying like these things occur, or unhappiness occurs when your values don't align with your actions.
Yeah.
Would that make that sort of just examines what we were talking about before?
Yeah, I mean, we're all... no one's perfect. It's not going to happen all the time, but the bigger the gap between your values and your actions, the more painful it is, right? We've all done things that we regret or things that we beat ourselves up over, and almost always that's because we acted against our values.
For sure, and that's like so much of my stuff too. It's like you have these values and you think about things that in your life, like everyone's like a drunken night or anything, from whenever it was, and you think, fuck, that's not who I am. I'm so that gets you down a bit.
Yeah, exactly. But then it can also get you back if you go to the other person and say, look, that's not who I am. That's not what I want to be. This is what I'm really about, you know. And this is one of the things that happens when we get hooked by our thoughts and feelings, is they do pull us away from our values. So if we can build up unhooking skills, it gets easier and easier to live those values.
Unhooking, it's such important. I can't stress enough, guys. Make sure you check out this book, and we'll have it in the show notes. We were talking before about anxiety and the positive sides of it too.
Yeah.
What in your what's some of those factors? Because sometimes I have this feeling with it too. It's like it's my worst enemy, but it's also my best friend.
Yeah,
in a sense.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And so again, because this is one of the things that we say in ACT, your emotions are your allies, and your most painful emotions are always telling you about really important stuff. They're telling you that there's something here that needs to be addressed or dealt with. There's something you need to face up to, or there's something you need to do differently. And you think of the word emotion, it's got the word motion within it. It's emotions have evolved to help us take action, to deal with stressful, challenging situations, or if there's nothing stressful or challenging, that's when the pleasant emotions show up and we can just enjoy ourselves. So, you take an emotion so fear's more present moment. Like if there was a snarling dog right there, I'd be feeling fear. But if I'm thinking that there may be a dog there, that's more anxiety. It's a bit more future oriented, but they're pretty similar, really, basically. Let's just go back to caveman times. Fear helps you it pumps blood to the large muscles of your body so that you can fight or run away. If there's a bear chasing you, you want to be able to either fight it off or run away. So adrenaline levels rise, heart rate rises, breath rate rises, your attention becomes very focused on what you need to deal with. So all of this is great if you channel it into the situation that you're in, whether that's playing a footy match or whether that's talking in front of an audience or whatever. But if you start struggling with that stuff, that's when it becomes your worst enemy, because now your attention's not on what you need to do, but it's on your feelings. Your energy's not being invested in what you need to do, but in struggling with your feelings. So you can't, if we can start to accept it, then we can turn it into an ally. We can open up, make room for it. It's a bit hard to do that in this podcast, but it's a very learnable skill. It takes about 20 minutes to kind of learn how to open up and make room for these feelings.
Physically, or
yeah,
is it
physically.
Like, yeah.
So the kind of, so if you think about acceptance involves, there's two parts. There's kind of dealing with the thoughts, and then there's also dealing with the sensations in your body, the racing heart or the knots in the stomach, which for a lot of people is actually even harder than dealing with the thoughts. But if you can learn to open up and make room for that, then you can start to get, what's the message in this emotion? What's it telling me that I need to address or face up to or tackle or do differently? Yeah. Sometimes the only message is I just need to take better care of myself. But often there are other messages, and often it links to your values. It's telling you something really important.
With the breathing technique, is that in the book, like the opening up the physical side?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
There's a number of different ways. Some of them involve breathing techniques. Some more of them kind of just involve sort of I'll do this with you so you get a sense of
definitely.
it. If your listeners are
driving
or riding a bicycle, they shouldn't do this. But if you're in a position where it's safe for you to have your hands free and pick up a book or a piece of paper or any object, and the idea is just hold it tightly and just imagine that in front of you is everything that's important in your life, both the important stuff that's pleasurable. Like, what are some of the pleasurable, important things in your life, Dyl?
My son, wife, coming to work, job, family.
Yeah. Watching the footy tonight.
Watching the footy tonight, yeah.
Food, music, favorite activities, all that stuff.
Yep.
And also some of the important, painful or difficult or boring or stressful stuff in your life that's not pleasant but is important, needs to be dealt with. What would be some examples?
Would that be things that I've sort of already looked through? Or
it might be stuff that you're procrastinating on. It might be problems that you need to tackle. It might be challenges. It might be a difficult conversation you have to have.
Sure.
Anything that's difficult, right?
Yeah.
And what you're holding now, so ideally people will have a sheet of paper or a book that they're holding with both hands. Or you could hold a pen, or you can have a phone, something you can hold in both hands. And the idea now is to imagine that this object you're holding the Hafner's trap, is to imagine that this object is all the difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, urges, cravings, physical sensations in your body, all the stuff inside you that you don't like, you don't want, and you'd really like to get rid of. And what I'm going to ask you to do now is push it as far away from you as you possibly can. So straighten your elbows, keep tight hold of it, both hands, push it far away. Dyl, you're not pushing hard enough. See if you can dislocate your shoulders there. Get it as far away.
It will come out.
And you're screwing up your face here. So I want you to notice three things as you're doing this, because everyone tells you to do this, right? Friends and family and Oprah Winfrey and lots of pop psychology shows tell you to do this, get this stuff away, right? Because you don't like it, you don't want it. So first thing I'm going to ask you to notice, how tiring is this?
Oh, I can't hold it much longer.
We'll only do it for another half an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Secondly, notice how distracting it is. Would you like to, be present with your kids or watch the footy like this?
No.
Pretty distracting. And thirdly, notice how hard it is to take action now, how hard to drive a car, cuddle a baby, cook dinner, type on a computer. Now rest it on your lap. And what's the difference?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Is that less effort?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and just looking over there, all the important stuff in your life, is it easier to focus on what you want to do?
Yeah, it is.
Easier to be present with your kids, to focus on the footy, whatever. Just move your arms around a bit. Easier to drive a car, cook dinner, play tennis.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a really good one.
And notice that it's still there. It's still in your lap.
Yeah.
You haven't gotten rid of it, but now you've got a new way of responding to it. It's no longer holding you back, pulling you out of your life, eating up all your energy. And here's the really cool thing is if there's something useful in there, in those painful thoughts, feelings, now you can get the wisdom from them. What are they telling you to address or do differently? If there's nothing useful in there, just let it sit there. But if there is something useful, now you can use it.
That's why this man sold 1 million books. That's fantastic. I genuinely feel good. It was really interesting when you're saying that because my shoulders were like actually breaking. This one was like dislocating, and you're so right. Like when you are pushing shit away, it just makes it so much harder to deal with everything else.
Yeah. So that's kind of an analogy.
Yeah.
And then the real work is it doesn't take long to learn how to do this for real.
Yep.
Obviously, doing it with the book is different than doing it with real feelings. But you can learn these skills quite quickly,
Love to. Through some other stuff there as well, there's like we spoke about then, like good anxiety, bad anxiety. What is toxic positivity?
I mean, the title says it all. It's when people are just so ridiculously positive. It's
Don't you hate those people?
Oh my God.
Fuck off.
It's ridiculous. I do. It's like, when I think the worst form it takes is when something really awful has happened to someone. And one of these folks says, "Oh, this is the best thing that's ever happened to you. This is a learning opportunity." Fuck off. It's
I must admit that was me like a year ago. Like I was so bad at that because when you have like your own awakening, then you're like, "No, man, I can change everyone," and then you just realize, no, people need to learn their own shit.
They do, and it takes a long time, and you keep learning.
I like that toxic positivity. Well, I think everyone will know of something. That's there.
I think it can be really invalidating for people.
It is.
It's
not. One thing that I really in this. How do you say this? There's so much incredible information out there now, and how far the world's come in terms of psychology and mindfulness and practices and all these certain bits and pieces, and it's almost like you get annoyed because you're like, that's not the right way. Once you work things out yourself, I'm sure as an actual professional that studied many, many years, you would get that a lot, whereas I don't know anything about it. But in a way, sometimes I look at breathing techniques or whatever it is, and that's a bit of a gateway into hopefully finding something like this that is long-term.
Yeah. I mean, breathing techniques are complicated because there's so many different types out there, and a lot of them are...
Sorry, I didn't mean breathing techniques in terms of in fully, but just little bits and pieces.
I know. Yeah. So it's kind of... and it's ongoing, and you keep learning. I kind of say in the book and in every workshop that I ever run, there are times I just completely forget all of this stuff. It just flies out of the window, and then I get hooked by my thoughts and feelings and jerked into self-defeating behavior, just like everyone else. But what happens is you get a bit faster, you get a bit quicker at catching yourself, a bit quicker at realizing, just got hooked again, a bit quicker at coming back to your values, a bit quicker at applying the kind of methods. So it's you never get perfect. There's always more to do.
Building genuine self-confidence.
Yeah.
How do you think we do that?
Well, if I can dazzle you with a bit of ancient word history, the word confidence actually comes from the Latin com, meaning with, and fides, meaning with faith. So originally, confidence was an act of faith. It meant or an act of trust. We get words like fidelity and so forth from fides. And so it really had nothing to do with how you feel originally. It was like an act of trust or an act of faith. I'm going to trust myself to do what's important, even if I'm terrified, even if I'm absolutely shitting myself, I'm going to do what's important. And it's only the last 100 years it's changed, and now it's become to mean a feeling of certainty, a feeling of assurance and absence of anxiety and doubt. Which is very unfortunate, because that feeling of confidence takes a long time to come. It's like if you're learning a new skill, if you're stepping out of your comfort zone, you're not going to feel confident. You're going to feel anxiety and self-doubt, which is normal and helpful. Anxiety will actually help you perform better if you make it your friend. Self-doubt will actually stop you from getting overconfident about your skills until you've got them. And so if we can kind of step out of our comfort zone over and over, do the hard yakka, learn the new skills, whatever it is, and make room for the normal nerves, anxiety, whatever you want to call it, that make room for the normal self-doubting or worrying thoughts that show up, and do that over and over and over again till we master the skill, till we've got the knowledge and experience that we need. Then the feelings of confidence may come later, but it's the actions of confidence come first. The feelings of confidence come later.
I love that. That's so cool. And it reminds me of the chat we had with Jonah as well, where on a different level, probably the next bit when it goes to the sports side of things, or not just sport, but when you're performing a task where people might get obsessed with feeling confident.
Yeah.
And it's not, you're getting mixed up between confidence and competence.
Yes.
Like
exactly.
knowing you can do something versus feeling confident.
Exactly. You've got to build the competence before you get the confidence.
Really
I've got another book called The Confidence Gap. I like all my books to have rhyming
Please
titles.
do. What other? So you've got 8 books.
10 now.
Holy shit.
But The Confidence Gap is very much that kind of focus. It's much more, whereas this is more about general happiness and depression, anxiety. Confidence is more specifically focused. So if people are looking for more of a sports performance, that might be
The Confidence Gap.
Yeah, I actually have a story about that. It's kind of I
love stories.
Well, this because I'm from England originally, but I think of myself as Aussie now. But when England's playing Australia in the cricket, it's always like a hard thing. And so, and back in 2011, Australia had such a good record with the Ashes that just won year after year. And Alistair Cook took over as captain of the English cricket team. And he wasn't doing very well, and he had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of anxiety. His game was pretty off, and he was really worried. And then his coach told him to read my book, The Confidence Gap. I only know this because he wrote it in his autobiography.
Wow.
I didn't know this at the time, and so he started applying ACT to himself. It really helped him get over his self-doubt, and then England beat Australia in the Ashes. So
That's your fault.
That's my fault. All my fault.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So
cool is that?
it was. But so it just applies to everybody in every endeavour. We don't have to be, footy players or cricket players. It's just life, right?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I love that notion of sport is life. Really, it's just competitive. It's competing to just be happy.
Yeah.
Trying to be. On the other books, there's 10 of them, so it's gonna be hard to get through them all today. What else would you say before we move back into this would be like a good read for our audience that you think would be applicable?
There's probably only 2 others that I'd mention because the rest of them are kind of more technical textbooks and stuff. But there's one for relationship issues. That's called Act with Love. And there's one...
What sort of relationship stuff is that? Like spouses, friends?
Yeah. Well, it's focused on intimate relationships like your spouse or your partner. But the principles actually will apply to any close relationship, but very much that kind of stuff. And then the other one is The Reality Slap, another rhyming title.
Good title.
That's for grief and loss. When reality slaps you around, how do you cope with that? And that's another case where positive toxicity is be strong and grow from this, and what does not kill you makes you stronger. It's like bullshit. It's kind of. This stuff hurts. Let's start off just by acknowledging how painful and how difficult it is. And, another important piece of this is kind of self-compassion, just being kind to yourself. And again, I find that quite often from young Aussie males, there's what's this self-compassion shit, mate? But it's like it's not a religious thing. It's just really acknowledging that you're hurting and being there in a kind way for yourself. So it's like, imagine you're going through a rough patch in your life. There's all sorts of difficult stuff happening. What kind of mate do you want at your side? Do you want the mate who says, suck it up, stop your whinging, get on with it, you got nothing to worry about, I don't want to hear about it? Or do you want the mate at your side that says, this is really shit, I've got your back, we're in this together, I'm with you every step of the way? What mate do you want?
You want that one. Yeah, well, it's something that I've really faced myself as well, what we were talking about earlier, and I suppose a lot of people have, is exactly that thing of, I feel like as a person, I'm always there for people. Like if you came to me and said, by the way, can we have a chat after this? I'm going through this. I'm like, mate, Russ, I've known you for an hour. Yeah. I've got your fucking back. What do you need? Let's sort it out. Yeah. You're a good guy. You've done all these awesome things. But then if I was experiencing that, I'd be like, you're a fucking weak dog. Why are you feeling like this? So It's almost that thing that we talk about a lot on the show, is like being your own best friend.
Yeah.
And it's like, how would you treat your mate if you were going through a situation?
Exactly.
And even if, like you said before, it is true.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you know, hey, I know this is true right now. I'm not where I want to be.
Yeah.
This sucks.
Yeah.
But let's not make the same mistake twice, and we'll put some plans in place to get out of it.
Yeah. One step at a time.
Mm.
Yeah. It is that, you know, I think that's a nice way. The term self-compassion puts people off, but being your best friend to yourself, that's a nice user-friendly way of talking about it.
Now that we're best friends too, and I want to make sure that, you know, we get this on record, because I'd love to get you in and talk about your other books as well, because I think they could have a really massive impact on our audience. And as I said, we live in the same area, so we can just hang out all the time and do all bits and pieces.
That sounds great.
Fantastic. A few more questions before we finish, because I just am really, really on the edge of my seat with this. What we spoke about earlier, there was a question I said, like, what do you think makes people unhappy? Mm-hmm. I feel like we've nearly answered that, in the sense of, would you still still agree with, like, going against your living against your values that you put against yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that obviously there's all the awful stuff in the world, poverty and violence and all that kind of stuff. But given all
I've missed out on those, Phil. But I completely agree.
All of that.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I'm guessing that most of us, most
have
of
a house
you,
on a roof.
Yeah, exactly. You've got a roof over your head. You've got food. You've got water. You've got shelter. You live in a democratic country, and the quality of life is, for most people listening to this podcast, the quality of life is better than it's ever been before in human history. We most of us live better today than kings and queens lived 200 years ago. So, if you've got all of those basics, what is it that is going to give you a meaningful life? It's kind of living your values and engaging in what you're doing. But going back to people that really are in awful situations, so about 7 years ago, I wrote a program for the World Health Organization for using ACT in refugee camps.
Wow.
And they've been delivering this in refugee camps, places like Uganda and Syria and Turkey. Some of these are just massive, like 100, 200,000 people living in tents in the middle of the desert. And all day long in the refugee camp, you've got choices. You can't just magically leave, but there's choices. There's people in the tent with you. Now, you can be kind and loving and supportive to the people in your tent, or you can be hostile and aggressive, or you can be distant and isolated. And those choices will alter the experience within the tent. And then when you leave the tent, same thing. There's neighbors in the other tents. You can be friendly, cooperative, supportive, kind, or you can be hostile, aggressive, or you can isolate yourself. You could join in with the community activities in the refugee camp, the football and prayer and singing and communal tasks, or you can isolate yourself. And so all day long there are choices you make that won't turn your life into something blissful, but will alter the quality of life within those awful circumstances. And what's really cool, when they asked me to do this, I just thought, this is just going to be useless. It was basic. I didn't think this would work, but they researched this, and they actually published three studies on this. And what they found was that from 10 hours of ACT, so they were kind of delivered in groups in the refugee camp. They'd have about 20 people in a hut, and it would be delivered through audio recordings, basically, which they translated into different languages.
Wow.
And so they'd listen for kind of like 2 hours a week, and they'd practice the different exercises, and they'd do that for 5 weeks running. So they got about 10 hours training. And just from that, significant reductions in depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, even while in those awful situations. So it can make a difference.
Incredible. Wow. That's I can't imagine, like, one being in that situation, but two having to find that like that stuff is still relevant in any situation possible. Yeah. Change of pace on that, but I just, in terms of, I'd love to get your opinion on this, and I might butcher the story on it, but when my dad went through some addiction stuff with alcohol through his journey, and I remember doing like a lot of research on it myself. And when I say research, I was watching YouTube videos. Okay, it wasn't like I was reading like Who articles or anything like that. But I was watching videos, and there was this one that popped up one day, a TED talk on addiction, and it spoke about, they did this like study on mice, and it was 2 different little areas, and there was mice that had water laced with just water, and then there was water and heroin, and they were in this like cage with like nothing at all but just the water, and they were just by themselves, and they just went and drank the water with heroin every time they got addicted to the drug. Yeah. Then there was the other cage that had like other mice in it, had a spinning wheel, had beds, had other food, had the water, and then the water with the heroin, and all they did was drink the water.
Yeah.
And the TED talk that it was talking about was discussing the fact that, like, you know, if you're a good person, like if you're engaged in community, if you're, you know, physically active, you're surrounded by a community, you're engaged in, you know, good things, then you're less likely to be engaging in things that are going to be bad for you than good.
Yeah. I mean, that experiment has been replicated hundreds of times.
Yeah, right,
it's rock solid, you know. It's good quality science. And so, you know, this is the thing. If you start living your values, reaching out to others, doing the important stuff, building a meaningful life, but you need those unhooking skills, because sometimes even just thinking about doing that brings up the anxiety monster, and it's all too hard, and you know, all those kind of self defeating thoughts, you know, I can't be bothered, and all this kind of stuff. You know, I mean, we talk about leaving the comfort zone, right? As soon as you leave the comfort zone, discomfort shows up. So how am I going to make room for all those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings?
For sure. And even for someone, you know, speaking on my own behalf, that's really, I love meeting new people, love putting myself in uncomfortable situations. Sometimes, like, I still get, you know, those such uncomfortable feelings. So for people that maybe aren't as advanced on that journey yet, like, it is a skill that is so big, and I'm really wary of going, hey, everyone, go join a fucking community group or cricket club tomorrow. Like, maybe the first step is like talking to the barista and saying, hello, how was your morning? Like, and it builds that comfort each time.
Yeah, absolutely. Baby steps, small steps over time. Again, that's a rock solid scientific principles being studied over and over.
I'm a scientist. Cool.
There you go.
That's one here we had was trauma, dropping an anchor.
This is actually a big thing that we did in the refugee camp scenario, because we know that people in refugee camps, usually they've had multiple traumas, multiple losses. I mean, just awful things that they've been through, plus the ongoing stress of living in a refugee camp is enough to traumatize anyone, even without all of that. So dropping anchor is a really simple practice. Basically, it's called dropping anchor because if your boat's sailing into the harbour, you've got a boat, right?
I've got a couple.
Haven't we all? But, you know, if your boat's sailing into the harbour and there's a big storm blowing up, the first thing that you've got to do is drop anchor. If you don't drop anchor, the storm's going to sweep your boat out to sea or smash it against the rocks. And so when our own emotional storms blow up, a big storm of anxiety or guilt or anger or whatever it is, so often they just sweep us away, and they just jerk us around and carry us off in different directions and pull us away from our values. So in the same way that you drop anchor to keep a boat steady during a storm, we drop anchor on ourselves to keep ourselves steady during a big emotional storm. So it's a kind of simple practice. I mean, I can take you through a 1-minute version of it.
Please
if you
do.
like. Yeah.
Love to. So I feel like you should be charging for this. So send an invoice later.
Again, if people
I have private health, so it's all good.
If people are driving or riding bicycles,
don't ride and close your eyes, please.
If you're doing brain surgery, don't do this now. You know,
I think brain surgeons are listening to this podcast. I'll just quickly.
So it's just a 3-part formula you can remember with ACE. So the A is for acknowledge the stuff that's happening inside you, acknowledge your thoughts and feelings. The C is for connect with your body, and then the E is for engage in what you're doing. And usually you would run through that ACE cycle 2 or 3 times. So let's just do it now. So kind of just take a moment, just to acknowledge the thoughts that are popping up for you, acknowledge the feelings, whatever you can feel in your body right now, not trying to control it or change it. You're just acknowledging that it's there, whatever the thoughts and feelings are. And if there's something uncomfortable or unpleasant, you're just allowing it, just acknowledging, okay, there's an uncomfortable feeling or an uncomfortable thought right now. And then the C is basically connecting with or coming back into your body. So kind of I'm pushing my feet into the floor, I'm straightening my back, I'm having a stretch. anything that just gets you moving or stretching or breathing. You can take a deep breath if you like, but just a sense there's a body around your thoughts and feelings, right? There's thoughts and feelings here, and there's a body that you can move. And then the E is for just engaging in what you're doing. So look around, notice where you are, notice what you can see, hear, breathe in the air, and then refocus on the activity that you're doing, which for you and me right now is having this conversation. Can I run through that one more time?
Please do.
Okay, so again, just kind of acknowledging whatever thoughts and feelings are there, not trying to change them, not trying to control them, even if they're unpleasant, just acknowledging this is here right now. And thoughts, feelings, anything that's happening. And then once again, connecting with your body. So I'm sitting up a bit more, I'm stretching a bit more. Whoa,
Yeah.
You're cracking your knuckles.
Yeah. That was you.
Breathing, moving, and then once again, engaging in the world around you, kind of looking around, noticing where you are, noticing what you're doing. So noticing there's thoughts and feelings here, not trying to distract you from them, not trying to control them, just acknowledging they're here, and a body that you can move so you can do all sorts of stuff with, and engaging, bringing your attention back to what you're doing right here, right now. So that's the gist of it. And what happened as you did that?
I loved it. Well, I just came back to where I was, felt present. It was good. So, like, for me, before going back to that point of when I do have those feelings, it's like push away rather than accept. So just going, they're here.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying them. I'm not, but just they're in there.
Yeah. So obviously this is harder when there are really difficult thoughts and feelings, but with practice.
But I have had, this is something that it's very similar to exactly what I was talking about before.
Yeah.
The other method, which is exactly the same. Yeah. It's really, really helpful.
So this is what we get people in the refugee camps doing when they're having flashbacks of these horrors and these awful memories and feelings of intense fear and anxiety or anger. It's kind of acknowledging it and coming back into their bodies and re-engaging in what they're doing. It makes a difference.
Incredible. Hey Russ, I honestly can't thank you enough for today, mate. You've been extremely, really generous with your time. And I've learned so much. I actually want to get you out here so I can start reading this.
Well, thanks so much.
Because it's been incredible. I really do appreciate it and would love to have you part of the family whenever you're around. Come on in and we can do it again.
You can see my hands are still sweaty.
I don't know why you're sweaty, man. It is warm in here, but
no, it's just it's a challenging situation.
Yeah.
You're great. You kind of put me at my ease and all of that, but still there's like a level of am I going to be coherent? Am I going to get the message across? How are people going to receive this?
Yeah.
It's a normal response. And if my hands weren't sweaty, you probably wouldn't know, right?
No, but when I get that feeling is, in all seriousness, I get the exact same feeling on Sunday night at about 9 p.m. Before the release comes out of the episode, and I go, you said some shit that didn't make sense. You are an absolute imbecile. But then I go, I'm like, I'm having that feeling again that I'm an imbecile. Now that I've learnt that, I'll put it into test next Sunday night before this episode comes out. But I think it just shows like we all experience things in such different ways. In the moment, sometimes I feel sweet, but it's like when things have passed and it's like...
Lovely.
Thank
so
you,
much.
mate. I really appreciate it. Absolute star. And can people get this anywhere online?
The Having a Strip, you can get it. You can get it at all good bookstores. You can get it at crappy bookstores too.
Yep.
It's online. It's everywhere.
Awesome. We'll have the link in the show notes of the Happiness Trap as well. And mate, I think what we would actually do is we're going to buy a few dust and do a little giveaway for everyone because I know how much they'll be keen to get their hands on this bad boy.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.